My name's Gavin Whitmore. I'm 38 now, a federal judge based in Colorado. People see the black robe, the calm authority, the quiet suburban house just outside Denver, and they assume I've always been on steady ground. What they don't see, what they could never guess, is the long, aching road it took to get here. It's not just a story of ambition. It's a story of being the wrong puzzle piece in a perfect-looking picture. I was born into the Whitmore dynasty, a name that once meant wealth, status, and control across Colorado. My father, Edward Whitmore, was a ruthless real estate tycoon. My mother, Clara, was grace itself, always composed, always immaculate at galas and charity dinners, the kind of woman who never blinked, even when surrounded by cameras. Our lives looked like a magazine spread. European vacations, homes that looked like movie sets, dinner parties filled with people whose smiles cost more than most cars. But none of that glittered on the inside. Behind those marble countertops and imported curtains was a truth no guest ever saw. Our house was never a home. Not for me. I was the eldest son, born into the throne room of a kingdom I never asked to rule. From the moment I could walk, I was told I was the future of Whitmore Properties. They didn't say it with joy, it was more like a contract being served. You're the one to carry it on, Gavin, my father said to me once, his eyes narrowing like he was giving a verdict, not a blessing. But I wasn't made for skyscrapers or cutthroat deals. I was the kid who got lost in thick books, who liked quiet debates over politics, who scribbled courtroom arguments in the margins of my notebooks instead of dollar signs. That part of me, the part that believed justice meant more than profit, wasn't just misunderstood. It was rejected. Like I had broken some unspoken rule. One dinner sticks in my memory like a scar. I was 11. We were seated at our polished oak table, lit by a chandelier so large it could have hung in a palace. My father was raving about a new condo development near downtown Denver, how many units, how fast they'd sell, how profitable it would be. I asked one question, just one, but if you build condos there, where will the poor people who live there now go? The air stopped moving. My mother's perfectly lined brows knit together as if I'd spat on the tablecloth. My father just gave a sharp smile, put down his fork, and said, "Gavin, you need to learn to think like a businessman. The world doesn't run on compassion." Even at 11, I felt something shift. Like the room had turned its back on me. That was the first time I realized I was not one of them. The years after that were a quiet war. There were no beatings, no screaming matches. That wasn't their style. My punishment was colder. The silence. The side glances. The way they praised other kids with sharp minds for profit. "Look at the Thompson boy," my mother once sighed, sipping her wine. 15, and already reading financial reports. You could learn a thing or two. I was 15 too, but I was reading legal cases, dissecting the Constitution. That didn't count. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt like the odd one out in your own family? The one who sees the world completely differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments. You're not alone. Some of us are just built for different battles, and I'm only just getting started. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Like no matter what you did, it was never enough because the spotlight had already found someone else. That was my life for as long as I can remember. I tried, God, I really tried. Straight A's, track team, drama club, even volunteered at the local library on weekends. I kept thinking, maybe this time they'll notice. Maybe this will make them proud. But it was like trying to solve a puzzle where I just didn't belong. Wrong shape, wrong piece, wrong kid. And then came Mason. Mason, my little brother, 3 years younger, and the golden boy from day one. He had this confidence, this natural way of charming people. While I was buried in textbooks, he could walk into a room and own it. When he turned 12, my dad, Greg Sanders, a proud real estate broker in Raleigh, started bringing him along to property showings and office meetings. Just to give him a feel for the business, he said, "I'll never forget how Mason looked coming home from one of those outings, eyes lit up, voice buzzing with excitement. Noah, I met a developer from Charlotte today. he said. Like it was the most magical thing in the world. I smiled, gave him a brotherly pat on the shoulder. But something inside me, cracked. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't the future of the Sanders family. Mason was. As I got older, the gap grew. My parents' attention, their time, their rare praisal of it gravitated to him. Dad took him on weekend trips to see commercial builds. Mum helped him prep for business competitions. When I won the state championship in public speaking, I brought the trophy home beaming. My mum glanced at it, nodded, and said, "That's nice, but maybe focus on something more realistic." A month later, Mason got a B in his finance class. Dad clapped him on the back and said, "Attaboy, that's how winners learn." That's when it really sunk. No, I wasn't jealous of Mason. I loved him, but I felt like furniture. Like I could vanish and no one would notice. And the worst part, I started believing they were right about me when it came time to pick a college. I said I wanted to study public policy at UNC Chapel Hill. I'd spent years watching the world get more unfair people left behind. Voices ignored. I thought, maybe I could help change that. Maybe that was my path. But the moment I told them, it was like a switch flipped. Public policy. My dad barked, standing in the center of our polished hardwood living room like a judge ready to sentence me. "What? You gonna be one of those broke idealists begging for votes? We build empires, no are not pipe dreams." My mum didn't speak. She didn't need to. The way she looked at me like I'd broken her favorite vascut deeper than his words ever could. That night, I sat in my room and stared at the backyard lights flickering through the oak trees. I started to question everything. Was I being selfish? Was it wrong to want a life that didn't mirror theirs? But then I remembered the kids I met at speech tournaments. The homeless teen who talked about fighting the foster system. The single mum who'd testified for healthcare reform. And I realized, my dreams weren't small, they just didn't fit inside their vision. So I applied anyway, got in, and when I told them, they didn't yell. They didn't fight, they just stopped. No more family dinners. No more conversations beyond "you eat today," or classes going okay. I was still living in the same house, but it was like I'd already moved out. A few weeks after graduation, I packed my things and left. Have you ever felt like you were just erased, not in a dramatic way, like in the movies, but slowly, piece by piece, till one day, you look around and realize you don't exist in your own family's story anymore? That's what happened to me. It started freshman year. While other kids were picking out dorm colors and getting care packages, I was clocking in at a rundown cafe just off campus. I paid for everything: tuition, books, rent with scholarship money, and tips from lattes. No help from my parents. Not a cent. Meanwhile, my brother, Ryan, was flown first class to a business school in Boston. Paid in full. Apartment covered. Meal plan covered. Summer abroad, why not? My parents called it investing in potential. I called it what it was: favoritism. I never resented Ryan. He had a knack for numbers and a charm that made boardrooms lean in. But every time Mum gushed about the gala he was invited to, or Dad bragged about his internship with a Fortune 500 CEO, something inside me cracked a little deeper. I hadn't just been cut off financially, I'd been cut out emotionally, so I buried myself in books. Law books, mostly. I joined the debate team. I memorized case law like scripture. There was something about justice, about finding clarity in a messy world, that pulled me in. I didn't want to be rich or famous. I just wanted to be ... useful. Still. Every holiday I went home, I felt like an outsider. My bedroom had been turned into a guest room. At the dinner table, my opinions were met with smirks or silence. One Christmas, Dad said, still trying to be a lawyer for the little guy, Nate. The way he said little guy like it was a joke burned more than I let on. But I didn't snap. I nodded, clenched my jaw, and kept going. Law school was brutal. I worked part-time gigs: library assistant, night clerk, even cleaned office buildings on weekends. I barely slept. Some nights, I'd be reading depositions until the sun came up, but I loved it. Every statute I memorized felt like armor. Every mock trial felt like training for something bigger. While I was scraping by, Ryan climbed the corporate ladder fast. He had an office at our dad's firm before I even took the bar. Suddenly, he was Ryan Whitaker, Vice President of Development, my name, not even whispered at family dinners. I was the mistake no one brought up. The kid who didn't fit the brand. But life has a funny way of circling back. 3 days after I passed the bar, Dad called, "Come home." He said, "We need to talk." I should have known better. But part of me, maybe the 10-year-old, still craving approval, hoped this was the moment he'd say, "I'm proud of you, son." Instead, I walked into his study, and he handed me a manila folder. "You'll represent the firm in this labor dispute," he said flatly. I opened it, read the summaries. My stomach turned. His company, our company, had been paying warehouse workers below minimum wage. Some were undocumented, others were teens, and the second they complained, they were fired. No severance, no due process. Just thrown out like trash. I looked up, "Dad, this is illegal. It's not just a bad look, it's wrong." His face darkened. "Wrong," he repeated, like I'd insulted him. "Who do you think you are, Nate? Some vigilante in a courtroom costume?" That line stayed with me. Not because it hurt, though it did, but because it told me exactly where he stood. "This is your family's business," he snapped. "Your legacy. If you can't get on board, you can get out." I paused, looked him in the eye, and said the only thing I could. I'd rather stand alone than stay silent. He slammed the door behind me. Now, I work for a non-profit legal group in Seattle. We defend workers who can't afford lawyers. We stand up to people like my father every day. And no, it's not glamorous. I don't drive a fancy car or get invited to galas, but I sleep just fine. Sometimes, people ask if I regret it turning my back on wealth, legacy, even my own family. But here's what I tell them: I didn't lose my family. I just found the truth, and sometimes, that's enough. So what would you do if your principles cost you everything you thought you wanted, but gave you back your soul? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. Would you like a thumbnail, text, title, and description to match this story for YouTube next? Have you ever been told by the very people who raised you that you no longer belonged to them? That you were no longer their child? It's a pain that lingers, even after the shouting stops. A silence louder than any argument. And that's exactly how my story begins. My father's voice was cold, but final. "You're not my son anymore." My mum didn't say a word. She just stood there, her arms crossed tightly, her lips trembling, eyes glassy like she might cry but never did. And I didn't beg, I didn't fight, I just nodded. Something inside me already knew this moment was coming. I grabbed my coat, walked out the front door, and behind me, the iron gate slammed with a loud clang. It sounded like a verdict, like the last line in a trial that I didn't even know I was part of. Just like that, I wasn't a Matthews anymore. The Denver streets were alive with noise, but inside me, empty. I stood still on the corner of 17th and Blake, watching people pass in every direction, none of them seeing me. My breath fogged in the crisp autumn air, and I whispered to no one, "What now?" I had no savings, no support, no backup plan. Just a brand new law degree, and this stubborn belief that truth and the people chasing it still mattered. Maybe it was naive. Maybe it was enough. The first few weeks felt like floating in a storm. I didn't sleep much. I found a shoebox of an apartment in Lakewood, cheap, damp, and barely heated. The walls were yellowed, the carpet smelled like mildew, and my neighbors shouted through the walls like I was living inside someone else's argument. It was miles away from the marble kitchen islands and private chefs I grew up around. But it was mine. I had maybe 3 months' worth of rent in my account. So I hit the streets the next day, resumes in hand. Most firms took one look at my last name and politely declined. The Matthews were known in Denver's legal world, and I was the black sheep, now. Then I walked into a firm called Harrison and Belsmore, scrappy, third floor of a crumbling building downtown. The elevator wheezed like an old man with each floor, and the office smelled like stale coffee and overworked ambition. Perfect. They didn't care about my last name. They cared that I worked hard, listened well, and didn't expect praise. I was hired on trial. My first case, a woman named Carla Diaz, a single mum of 2 boys who had been illegally evicted by a landlord who didn't want kids running around the place. I remember sitting across from her, hands trembling as she slid eviction papers across the desk. She looked at me and said, "Do you think people like us ever win?" I swallowed hard. I had no idea, but I told her the truth. I think they can. That case changed everything. We won. Not because I was brilliant, but because I cared, because I saw Carla, her sons, and her pain. And that mattered more than pedigree. Every case after that felt like laying bricks for a new home. I took on wage theft, wrongful terminations, tenant abuses. My days were long and underpaid, but they gave me something my family never did: meaning. People like Carla taught me what justice looked like when no one's watching. It wasn't about fancy offices or high-profile lawsuits. It was about real lives, real people, and real change. Do I miss my family? Sometimes. I wonder if my mum ever cried after I left, or if my dad ever regretted the way he said it. But then I think about the people I've stood up for. I think about Carla's boys running through their new apartment. I think about the handshakes, the quiet thanks, the tears, and I realize I didn't lose a family. I found a calling. Now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to start over completely? If so, what pushed you forward when everything else was gone? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your story too. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to win a battle that no one believed you could fight, let alone win? I'll never forget the way she looked at Methan, tired, clutching a folder filled with overdue rent notices. We were crammed into a drafty little room above a deli in downtown Denver. Her hands trembled as she spoke about her kids, about the nights they couldn't sleep because the landlord kept banging on their door, threatening to lock them out. "I don't know what to do, Mr. Grayson," she whispered, barely holding it together, and in that second, it hit me. Wasn't just courtroom theatrics or thick textbooks. It was this, a lifeline, something that could actually matter to someone like her. I went all in. Burned the midnight oil, reading every line of Colorado's tenant protection statutes. Looked up obscure housing cases, called every contact I had, and when the judge ruled in our favor, she didn't just say thank you, she cried into my coat, whispering, "I thought people like me didn't stand a chance." That moment changed something in me, made me believe I was meant for this. But not every day felt like that. There were weeks I barely slept, surviving on cheap coffee and canned soup. I'd come home to my tiny studio, one window, no heat, wonder how much longer I could keep this up. The money barely covered rent, my body hurt. My spirit cracked a little more with every unpaid bill, and yeah, sometimes I'd remember the way things used to be, not the luxury, not the trust funds, or the catered birthdays, but the presence, the sense that someone was there. Growing up in the Grayson estate felt like living in a museum. Cold, quiet, curated. But at least there were voices. Now it was just me, and the hum of a broken fridge. I didn't call my parents, they didn't call me. I'd see their names in business articles. Sometimes Grayson Developments opens new luxury complex in Vail or Miles. Grayson named one of America's top real estate titans. Every time it felt like pressing on a bruise. But I made myself a promise. I'd do this without them. No phone calls, no favors, no shortcuts, just grit. For 3 straight years, I said yes to every case that walked through the door. Eviction, fights, wage theft, shady contracts. If it smelled unfair, I was on it. I learned how to listen before I spoke. How to keep calm when opposing counsel tried to steamroll me. How to stare down men in $1,000 suits who thought I was just another kid playing lawyer. But I wasn't playing. I had something to prove. I had every word my father ever said. "You'll never make it. You're soft. You don't have what it takes," ringing in my ears like gunshots. So, I used them. Each win was like striking a match against the wall of doubt they'd built around me. By year 4, people started noticing. Clients came not just because I was cheap but because I was relentless. I earned a nickname around the courthouse, the underdog's attorney. I liked that. It made me feel like maybe I was doing more than just lie. Was shifting the balance a little. Then came the call that changed everything. A colleague invited me to speak at a regional legal conference in Boulder. I almost said, no, I didn't think I belonged on a stage with those names. But something in me said, go. I worked on that speech like my life depended on it. When the day came, I stood in front of 100 lawyers and judges, hands slightly shaking, and talked about why the law must protect those who can't afford to defend themselves. And when I finished, they stood, all of them. That moment, that applause, it wasn't just for the speech, it was for every night I spent alone, doubting if any of it mattered. For every client who couldn't pay me but hugged me like I saved their world. For every time I swallowed my pride and kept going. I'm curious. Have you ever felt like you had to prove yourself to people who swore you'd fail? Tell me in the comments, what's the moment that made you realize you were enough? Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't yelling louder or demanding acknowledgement, it's becoming undeniable. Have you ever chased something for so long, only to realize that what you really wanted wasn't the title, the salary, or even the respect, but the silence that comes when you finally prove them all wrong? I remember the day Judge Harold Grayson reached out and shook my hand. His grip was firm, but his eyes were kind. You've got the makings of a great judge, Adam, he told me. Keep at it, and you'll go far. That moment hit me harder than I expected. It was like someone finally saw past the scars I'd carried for years. His words didn't just land, they lifted. Like wind filling the sails of a ship I thought would never move again. By my 5th year as an attorney, something happened that I never saw coming. A judicial seat opened in Colorado. A real chance to sit on the bench. Me, a kid who once overheard his own father call him a waste of potential. Applying was brutal. Endless interviews, hypothetical moral dilemmas. Whispered doubts about whether I was too young, too green, too ambitious. I almost talked myself out of it more than once. But somehow, I held on. My record spoke for me along with a few kind souls who believed I belonged in that room. And then, it arrived. The envelope looked plain. But what was inside shattered something deep in me. My appointment letter. I held it in both hands like it might float away. Then I cried hard, not because I was sad, but because for the first time in my life, I knew I was enough. I was no longer just the kid they gave up on. I was now a judge. A man whose decisions could alter lives, shape justice, and hopefully do some good. Sitting on the bench was nothing like arguing in court. It wasn't loud, it was quiet, weighty, sometimes terrifying. Every case, every ruling, it all sat on my chest. One wrong word and someone's whole future could tilt the wrong way. And there were nights I didn't sleep. One case still haunts me. A father stole groceries just enough to feed his 2 kids for the week. I saw the exhaustion in his face. The pride he tried to hide behind broken English. I had to choose, mercy or order. If I let him go, would the system unravel? But, if I punished him, what did that say about the kind of world we were building? In the end, I gave him probation and connected him with a local pantry and a job training center. I still think about his face when he left the courtroom, like he'd been given oxygen after nearly drowning. Moments like that reminded me why I said yes to this path. Not for applause, not for revenge, but for justice, real, messy, human justice. 7 years passed. Fast. And in that time, I didn't just earn a title, I rebuilt my life from scratch. I found real friends in the legal world. People who weren't just playing the game, but who still believed in fairness. I started volunteering teaching law classes at underfunded high schools. Some of those kids reminded me of myself. Lost, quiet, unsure. On weekends, I'd ride my old bike through the streets of Denver, feeling the mountain air cut through the noise in my head. I even learned to cook terribly. My kitchen was a war zone, but it made me laugh. And on rainy evenings, I'd curl up by the window with a book, feeling something close to peace. But even in those moments, something lingered. I missed them. My family. I told myself I didn't, that I'd outgrown the need for their approval. But late at night, when the house was still, I'd think about my mum, about Jacob, my brother. And, though I'd never admit it out loud, even my father. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of Jacob on the news now, vice president of some mega real estate firm out west, polished, powerful, exactly what our father wanted. I wasn't jealous, but I did wonder if he ever thought of me too. Have you ever felt that kind of ache? The kind that doesn't scream, it just hums under your skin. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever walked away from your family, only to wish they could see who you became? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your stories matter to Dot. What would you do if the very people who once made you feel invisible suddenly needed your judgment to decide their fate? I used to ask myself that question during those long silent nights when I was studying law with no one cheering me on. Not my parents, not my brother. They had eyes only for Carter, the golden child. The one they called brilliant at every dinner party. The one they said would take the family business to the next level. And me, I was just the other son. The quiet one. The one they forgot at the airport once and never apologized for. But I wasn't bitter. I genuinely wondered if Carter was truly happy living under our father's suffocating expectations. Or was he, like me, just surviving? There were moments I thought about calling him. Just to check in? Just to say, hey, are you okay? But every time my fingers hovered over his name on my phone, doubt crept in. They don't need me. I'm just a shadow in their perfect painting. So I put the phone down and kept building my own life. By the 7th year, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I'd earned a seat as a district judge in Denver, and for once, when people said my name, Lucas Barrett, they didn't follow it with Carter's brother. No. Now it was Judge Barrett. Defender of the people, relentless, uncompromising. I started receiving handwritten letters from victims I'd helped, from young attorneys who told me they wanted to be like me. I smiled at their words, but deep down, I never forgot those early days. The ones where I ate ramen 3 nights in a row, just to afford my books. The ones where my own mother said, "You should really learn something from your brother." Words like that don't fade. They scar, and scars, they don't just remind you of pain, they remind you of growth. So when I found out that my next decision would involve my family, I felt the ground shift under me. Not a dinner, not a phone call, no warm hug, just a file on my desk labeled, State of Colorado v. Carter Barrett, my brother, the one I used to ride bikes with down the block. The one I used to sneak cookies to after Mum grounded him, and now, the one accused of defrauding investors through our father's company. Millions gone. Lives ruined. Headlines screaming betrayal. That morning, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, adjusting my tie, repeating my breathing exercises. My judge's robe lay folded on the chair behind me, a symbol of everything I'd worked for, but today, it felt heavier than ever. Not because I doubted the law, I never did, but because I knew whatever judgment I handed down would echo far beyond the courtroom. When I entered the Colorado State Courthouse, everything was sharper. The smell of waxed floors, the click of heels, the murmurs. Cameras flashed, my name whispered in every corner. That's his brother. The judge is his brother. I stepped up to the bench, steady, silent. Then I saw them. My father sat in the second row, stone-faced, arms crossed, not a wrinkle in that $1,000 suit. Next to him, my mother, lips pressed so tight they were nearly invisible. And behind them, the family's high-priced lawyers, whispering furiously, Dot and Carter. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the floor, hands cuffed, jaw clenched. It hit me then, the irony. All these years chasing their attention, craving their validation. And now I held the power to determine his future. Can you imagine that? What would you do if the brother they favored, the one they built altars to, stood before you, waiting for your sentence? Would you be fair? Would you be kind? Or would the weight of all those forgotten birthdays, all those empty chairs at your graduation, pull you toward revenge? Tell me in the comments. If you were me, what would you have done? Because in that moment, I didn't feel powerful, I felt human. And that's what scared me most. Have you ever stood in a room full of people who were supposed to love you, and still felt completely invisible? That's what it was like, sitting at the bench that morning. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, murmurs folding into the wooden walls like old smoke. My father, Richard Davenport, sat in the front row, shoulders square, suit crisp, tie knotted. Like a noose, he hadn't aged gracefully. His face looked weathered, thinner, like power had started to drain him instead of fuel him. My mother, Evelyn, was beside him. She looked small, fragile, even her hands were folded so tightly I thought her knuckles might snap. She didn't look at me. Neither of them did. To them, I wasn't their son anymore. I was the judge. Worse, I was the traitor. I struck the gavel once, steady but sharp. The silence that followed was heavy. The prosecutor rose with purpose, laying out the charges with a voice that cut like a scalpel. The defendant, Mr. Lucas Davenport, stands accused of falsifying financial records for Davenport & Co. and rerouting millions into offshore accounts to avoid taxes and conceal criminal profits. Emails, wire transfers, employee testimony. The case had teeth. And all I could do was listen. My pen moving out of habit, while my heart ran somewhere else, back to a soccer field. A little boy trailing behind me, begging me to wait up. Back when Lucas would giggle if I let him score. A goal, my baby brother. How did we get here? Lucas sat still at the defense table, face pale, jaw set too tight. His lawyer, the type who looked like he played golf with senators, claimed it was all a clerical misunderstanding. "There's no intent," he said, "just a mistake." But when I looked into Lucas's eyes, I didn't see confusion. I didn't see fear. I saw guilt. He didn't look like the kid I grew up with. His gaze darted too quickly. His body seemed folded in on itself, like someone carrying more weight than he knew what to do with. And part of me knew this wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This was about the crushing force of our father's expectations, the way failure was never an option in our house. Maybe Lucas broke under it. Maybe we both did, in different ways. The trial dragged on. Arguments clashed like steel. I kept my face neutral, my voice even, but inside I was unraveling. Every new piece of evidence was another crack in the Davenport name, in the myth my father built and forced us to carry. By late afternoon, when court recessed, I made it back to my chambers and shut the door behind me. I sat down, elbows on the desk, fingers digging into my scalp. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pick up the phone, call Lucas, and ask, why? Why didn't you just come to me before it got this far? But I couldn't. I wasn't his brother. Here I was the judge. That night, sleep didn't come. Just questions. The next morning, as I was sorting notes before court resumed, the clerk knocked gently and said, "Judge Davenport, someone's here to see you." I figured it was a lawyer, maybe a witness, but when the door opened, it was my mother. She wasn't wearing design or anything, just a plain gray sweater. Her hair was pulled back, and her face looked older than I remembered. Real, tired. "Ryan," she said, her voice soft and shaky. "I just want to talk for a moment." I nodded, motioning to the chair across from me, but I felt a sharp pinch in my chest. It was the first time she'd said my name in almost 4 years, and still, I didn't know if I wanted to hear what she had to say. "Now let me ask you something. If your family chose silence over truth, would you still protect their name, or, finally, protect yourself? Tell me in the comments, what would you do if your sibling stood trial and you were the judge?" I hadn't spoken to her in 7 years, not a word. So when I stepped out into the hallway during the recess and saw her, then nervous, wringing her hands, waiting, I froze. She looked older, smaller than I remembered. "Are you doing well?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, eyes scanning me like she was trying to find the version of me who used to call her mum without bitterness. I gave her a stiff nod. I'm fine, Susan. Yes, first names now. That's how far apart we were. She paused, visibly wounded, but pressed on. Wesley didn't mean for any of this. Noah, he was overwhelmed. Your father, he pushed him too hard. You know how your dad is, you always knew. I bit down on the inside of my cheek. To steady my voice, I can't talk about the case, I said. I'm the judge. She nodded, reluctantly, her eyes glassy but insistent. Just remember, he's still your brother. Family doesn't stop being family, Noah. I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped aside, opened the chamber door, and said, as gently as I could, you should get back to your seat. We're about to resume. She left quietly, and just like that, a piece of me splintered. But if I gave in to that crack, everything else might fall apart. The third day of trial came with another storm this time. Wearing a smile and a suit, Harold Brenner, a retired circuit judge, the same man who once patted my shoulder after my first ruling and called me a rising pillar of integrity. He walked into my office unannounced, all warm handshakes and old man charm. Noah, he said, closing the door gently behind him. I hear you're presiding over quite the tightrope. Big case, lots of eyes. I gave a cautious smile. That's right. His voice dropped. A young judge's career can ride on how he navigates sensitive matters. You get what I'm saying? I tilted my head. Not exactly. Why don't you spell it out? He chuckled, too quickly. Just saying. Sometimes showing a little mercy today saves a world of trouble tomorrow. Right then, I knew. He wasn't here as Harold Brenner, he was here as my father's mouthpiece. Looked him straight in the eye. I appreciate the visit, but I'll do my job the way it's meant to be done, according to the law. The smile left his face like a tide going out. Of course, he said quietly, and he left. That night, the pressure got personal. There was a letter in my mailbox, real paper, elegant cursive. My mother's handwriting. I hadn't seen it since those innocent Christmas cards with snowflakes and promises. My hands trembled as I opened it. She wrote about the backyard games, about Wesley scraping his knee, and me giving him a piggyback ride all the way home. You and your brother were everything to us, she wrote. Don't let justice tear this family apart. Every sentence pulled at old memories I thought I'd buried. But it wasn't just nostalgia. It was a guilt trip wrapped in warm ink. A final attempt to reach the boy in me. I folded the letter slowly, like it might shatter if I moved too fast. Then I put it in a drawer and whispered to myself, they want me to forget what's right. I won't. And then came the day the truth burned under the lights of the courtroom. The prosecution submitted one last piece of evidence, an email, direct, unambiguous. Wesley had written to a junior executive, telling them to adjust the figures. To avoid scrutiny, his name was on it. His words, I turned toward him. I needed him to deny it, say it was fake, say it was taken out of context, but he didn't flinch. No shake of the head, no tears, just that same cold silence. Have you ever stared at someone you used to protect and wondered who they really are? That was me. And now, I want to ask you something. What would you have done? Would you bend to family pressure or let the truth cut through blood ties? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know. Have you ever found yourself standing between justice and family? Knowing whichever choice you make, something inside you will break. That's exactly where I was. The courtroom was cold, that day, not in temperature, but in spirit. I could feel it in my bones as I stood behind the bench. My fingers tightened on the edges of my black robe, grounding me, reminding me of the responsibility I carried. The trial was ending, and the man on trial was my younger brother Mason. He sat there, silent, not a word. Just bowed his head like he was trying to hide inside himself. His lawyer tried to reframe everything, paint the choices as business. A series of missteps, not malicious intent, but the evidence was a tidal wave, emails, financial records, false contracts. The room could smell the truth, and still, What hurt the most wasn't the thought of Mason being convicted. It was that moment when I finally understood just how far he had gone. How far we had all gone, chasing the impossible. My chest ached not with judgment, but with grief. He had been swallowed whole by ambition, by trying to meet our father's impossible standards, by trying to outrun the shadow of not being enough. As we reached the end of the proceedings, I looked over at him and allowed a final statement. He rose slowly, as if the weight of everything he'd done was hanging on his shoulders. His voice cracked. I just wanted to make our parents proud. I never meant to hurt anyone. I only did what I thought was necessary. And in that moment, every wall I had built up for 7 years, cracked. Those words, simple, raw, broken, stabbed deeper than any accusation. I turned to the front row where my parents sat. Mum couldn't hold it in. Her head dipped, and I saw her shoulders shake as tears ran down her face. My father, stone-faced for years, just sat upright, but his eyes, they were hollow. It was like he'd finally realized the cost of his silence, of his pressure, of everything he demanded from us. I struck the gavel with more force than I meant to. Court is in recess, I managed, before slipping away to my chambers. Inside, I let the door shut behind me. No one else, just me and the weight of it all. The room spun quietly. I dropped into the leather chair by the window, the glow of the Denver streetlights flickering through the blinds like ghosts. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat there until dawn thinking of Mason, of how we used to be. Of the years I spent rebuilding my life after I cut ties with my family, trying to forget, but family doesn't vanish just because you stop talking. I thought about what justice means, about why I put on this robe, about the truth and the line between empathy and duty. Because if I let love cloud the law, I'd lose everything I believed in. And if I didn't show a shred of compassion, I'd lose what little family I had left. The next morning came in with gray skies. I stood outside the courtroom door, robe gripped in both hands, my lungs tight. The hallway was silent, but the pressure god, it was loud. I thought of the first day I walked into this courthouse. No one knew I had a brother named Mason. I never talked about him. But now, everyone knew. I pushed open the door. The creak of the wood felt like thunder. The gallery was packed. Cameras tucked into corners. Reporters scribbling notes. Business people. Law students. Strangers. All of them watching, waiting for the judge who was also the brother. People whispered, "That's Mason Langston's brother, the judge. Do you think a judge should recuse himself in a case like this? Would you leave a comment? I want to hear what you think. But here's what you need to know. I didn't recuse myself, because no one else would have done it fairly. No one else knew what I knew, and no one else was willing to hold the mirror up to our family." Walk to the bench. I looked down at Mason. His eyes met mine just for a second. And in that second, everything passed between us. Childhood memories, broken promises, the years we didn't speak, and the silence that had lived between us ever since. Then I spoke, and no, I won't tell you here what my ruling was, because this story isn't about the verdict, it's about the moment when I realized that justice, and love, sometimes live in opposite corners of the same room, and when you're standing in between, no matter which way you turn, you leave with a scar. I never imagined I'd find myself here on the bench, gavel in hand, passing judgment, not on a stranger, but on the person I once built tree forts with. I wasn't a judge today, I was just a son, a brother, a man trying to hold it together while the people I loved tore apart in front of me. The courtroom was silent when I entered, but the tension was unbearable. Front row, my parents sat apart, like strangers on opposite ends of a crumbling bridge. My father, David Armstrong, still wore that air of old-school dignity. But I could see his shoulders twitch, ever so slightly, like the pressure was finally getting to him. My mother, Lorraine, looked even worse. Her eyes were raw and ringed with exhaustion, and she clutched a wrinkled tissue like it was her only anchor in the storm. Neither of them looked at me. They didn't have to. I could feel the weight of their shame pressing down on me. I tapped the gavel. Its sharp crack echoed through the courtroom like a shot. This court will now continue proceedings in the trial of Colton Armstrong. My voice was firm, but inside, I was splintering. Elena Ruiz, the state prosecutor, rose smoothly. She was sharp, confident, composed, hair pulled into a perfect braid that hadn't moved all day. Your Honor, she said, locking eyes with me, we're prepared to submit our final piece of evidence. We believe it will clarify Mr. Armstrong's full intent. I gave a brief nod, but my eyes betrayed me. They flicked to Colton. He sat at the defense table, head bowed, hands clenched so tightly his knuckles blanched. That wasn't the brother I knew. Not the kid who used to light up our backyard with laughter, or the ambitious tech mogul who once graced magazine covers. That boy was gone, replaced by a man drowning in silence. Remember who you are, Noah, I told myself. You're a judge, not his brother. Ruiz walked to the center of the courtroom, a stack of thick documents in hand pages stamped with blood-red digits. These, she said, raising them slightly, are internal reports from Armstrong Development, disclosed by a former employee, Ms. Ana Vasquez. Murmurs spread through the room like fire licking dry grass. Ana Vasquez. The name stirred something in me. I hadn't seen her in years. She used to bring me butterscotch candies when I visited Dad's office as a boy, smart, quiet, loyal. Now here she was, stepping into the witness stand with quiet authority. Slim, grey-haired, and trembling only slightly, Anna raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth. And I believed her before she even spoke. Ruiz didn't waste time. Ms. Vasquez, can you explain what's outlined in these records? Anna didn't flinch. These are financial documents I uncovered while working at Armstrong Development. They detail Mr. Colton Armstrong's directives to funnel company earnings into offshore accounts. It was not just tax evasion, it was concealment of profits from unlawful property sales. I confronted Mr. David Armstrong about it. He told me to stay quiet. Gasps. A thud from the back row. I slammed the gavel once, twice, 3 times. Order returned, but barely. I looked at my father, and for the first time in my life, he looked defeated. That stoic veneer had cracked. His skin was pale, almost waxen, and he sat stiff as if the truth had drained the life out of him. I looked at my mother, her fingers wrapped around his wrist, either in comfort or collapse. That moment, it broke something in me, but maybe it also mended something I'd buried for years. Tell me, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have spoken the truth? Or stayed silent to protect your blood? Comment below. I want to know where you draw the line between loyalty and justice. Have you ever stood at the edge of a moment so heavy, it felt like the entire weight of your family's past was pressing on your chest? That was me, on that freezing November morning in downtown Portland, staring across the courtroom at a man I had once shared bunk beds with. His name was Caleb Monroe, my younger brother. The one who used to sneak Oreos into my backpack before big tests. Now he sat there, in a grey suit that didn't quite fit, eyes down, hands clenched, like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Our mother reached for his hand once, gently, but he brushed her off. His gaze never left Mr. Delgado. The whistleblower. I knew what was racing through Caleb's mind. How could Delgado, someone who once called us family, turn against us like this? But I also knew the answer. Because sometimes, the truth gets buried. For so long it starts to rot. I turned to Caleb's defense attorney, a seasoned litigator named Rick Holtz. He tried to paint Delgado as bitter, petty, possibly lying. Resentment can drive men to do strange things, he said. But as Delgado's documents stacked up on the evidence screen, emails, account transfers, internal memos, the room went still. The air got thick. You could feel the jury leaning forward. I scribbled notes in the margin of my legal pad, trying not to let my hand shake. But my chest, it was caving in. This wasn't just another white-collar case. This was a slow-motion dissection of everything we'd been taught to protect. The Monroe legacy. My father's empire. The broken expectations that turned Caleb into this. By mid-afternoon, I had to call for closing arguments. The prosecutor, Ms. Tanya Ruiz, delivered hers with fire. She didn't yell, she didn't need to. Her words cut clean. This is not just fraud, it is betrayal of clients, of family, of trust. Mr. Monroe knew what he was doing, and he did it anyway. Then holtzrose.com/measured, but his tone was different now. No longer attacking the evidence, just pleading. Caleb Monroe didn't act out of greed, he acted out of desperation. From the pressure of carrying a family name that never allowed him to fail. And I listened. I kept writing, but one thought wouldn't let go. What am I supposed to do with this? The moment came. My clerk handed me the verdict papers. I stood. The courtroom hushed. My judge's robe suddenly felt 100 pounds heavier. Every eye turned to my except Caleb's. He couldn't look, and somehow, that hurt most of all. My voice rang out. I kept it steady. After careful review of the evidence and testimonies presented, the court finds the defendant, Caleb Monroe, guilty of financial fraud and money laundering under Oregon state and federal law. He is hereby sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay $2.5 million in restitution to affected parties. I paused, then I looked straight at him. I wanted him to look up, but he never did. The law does not ask if the accused is your brother. The law demands fairness, without exception. Justice must be served. You could have heard a pin drop, until my mother began to cry, quiet at first, then louder. Caleb's shoulders shook, but he didn't wipe his face. My father, he stood up so suddenly his chair toppled over. And just like that, he walked out. Didn't glance at me, not once. Mum stayed, her hands covering her face like she couldn't believe what she'd just witnessed. The reporters scribbled furiously. I heard whispers. That's Judge Monroe. He just sent his own brother to prison. If this story hit you, tell me, what would you have done in my place? Would you have chosen family or justice? Let me know in the comments. I'm still asking myself that question every single day. Have you ever done the right thing and still felt like the villain in your own story? When I brought the gavel down and declared the sentence, the courtroom fell silent, stone cold. I rose, each step away from the bench heavier than the last, as if my shoes were filled with cement. Back in my chambers, I shut the door behind me, peeled off the black robe, and let myself collapse into the leather chair. I didn't cry, I haven't in years. It's not that I don't feel things, trust me, I do, but tears became a luxury. I learned to live without. Still, what I felt then was harder than tears. It was emptiness, a raw, echoing void. I had done the right thing. No bribes, no backroom favors. Just the law, fair and clean. But if I was so right, why did it hurt like I'd just buried someone? I turned toward the window. The sunlight was dying slowly over Denver's skyline, shadows falling across buildings like quiet accusations. And in that light, one question beat against my ribs. Will my family ever understand I did this because I believe in justice, not because I wanted to destroy us? I couldn't go home, not yet. Instead, I drove west, past the edge of town, toward the foothills of the Rockies. There's this turnout, quiet and empty, where the stars don't have to compete with city lights. I parked, stepped into the cold, and tilted my head back. The sky was clear, endless, and brutal in its honesty, and I thought of my brother Landon. I thought about how we used to be, backyard football games, birthday pranks, beer on the roof at 20, and I thought of my parents, their silence louder than any condemnation. I imagined Mum's hands folded tight in her lap, Dad's jaw clenched like it could grind granite. But I also thought of the people my verdict protected. The families who trusted Landon with their retirement savings. The single mum who invested in his phony startup. The janitor who lost his pension. Those people didn't have blood ties. All they had was the law. And I swore that night, under that cold Colorado sky, that if I had to lose my brother to keep faith with those people, I could live with that. Or at least try to. The days after the verdict felt strange. I'd presided over hundreds of cases, but none like this. None that left me looking over my shoulder every time the phone rang. The media went wild. The Iron Judge. No one above the law. Articles praised my integrity, my commitment. Headlines made it sound heroic. But it didn't feel that way. Not when each word reminded me I was now a stranger to my own family. A week passed. Then came my father's first public words. He didn't call, he didn't write. He went to the Denver Ledger and gave them a quote that burned hotter than any wildfire. Jackson Reed may be my son, but he betrayed this family the day he sent his brother to prison. I was sipping coffee in the kitchen when I read it. I didn't slam the mug, or curse, or throw the paper across the room. I just sat there, the words settling like dust on an unused bookshelf. He betrayed this family. It echoed, not he upheld. The law, not he tried to save Landon from himself. No, just betrayal. And you know what cut the deepest? That somewhere in their eyes, I might always be that villain. But here's where I want to ask you, what would you have done? If your sibling was guilty, the evidence airtight, the damage vast, would you turn away? Would you bend the law? Or would you do what I did, stand alone for what's right, even if it means burning bridges that may never be rebuilt? Drop a comment below. Tell me honestly. I want to hear your take. Would you choose justice or family? Because in the end, I chose the truth. And truth, as it turns out, is one hell of a lonely thing. That question played on a loop in my head the morning I saw my father's face plastered across the front page of the Tribune. I was standing in my office, holding a cold cup of coffee, staring at every word like they were carved in stone. Miles chose the law over blood, my father said. He thinks he's noble, but he's just a coward hiding behind rules. He destroyed everything this family built. I should have expected those words, but they still cut deeper than I'd ever admit out loud. The criticism wasn't new, but seeing it published, broadcasted, dissected, that made it real, permanent, as if I hadn't lost sleep, friends, and my sense of belonging to get to that verdict. Ironically, the world outside my family didn't see it that way. My father's words ignited a fire online. People from every corner of the country weighed in. Judge Miles Grant did what was right. One post read, "Justice isn't about family, it's about truth." Another tweet stung for a different reason. Nathan Grant should ask himself how he raised a son he now calls a traitor. One who had the courage he never did. I don't spend much time scrolling social media, but Sarah, my clerk, printed a few of those comments and placed them on my desk with a knowing smile. "You should read these," she said. "They're not all knives." I smiled back, but it felt hollow. The truth is, public praise doesn't patch up private wounds, especially not the kind inflicted by people who once tucked you in at night. My mother didn't go to the press like my father. She chose a quieter kind of pain. I hadn't heard from her in 7 years ever since the day she walked out of that courtroom without even meeting my eyes. But that morning, while the world debated my verdict, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it ring. But something in my gut told me to answer. "Miles," she said softly. Her voice was older, thinner, like wind through dry leaves. "Could we meet? Just talk?" I froze. 7 years of silence suddenly melted into a single heartbeat. Was I ready to see her again? I didn't know, but I said yes. 4 o'clock, I said, at Jordan S. Cafe on Maple. That cafe had become a kind of refuge for me. Brick walls, hanging ferns, soft jazz playing from an old speaker in the corner. I spent my Sundays there, grading case notes and nursing bitter espresso. It was quiet, safe. So when I walked in and saw her sitting by the window, I felt like someone had carved a hole into my sanctuary. She looked smaller. Her gray sweater hung loose around her shoulders. Her hair, once auburn, was streaked with silver. A cup of untouched tea sat in front of her. She looked up, and for a moment, neither of us knew what to say. "Are you doing well, Miles?" she asked gently, the same way she used to ask when I came home with scraped knees. I nodded. "I'm fine, Mum," she tried to smile. It wavered. "I've read what they've said about you, the articles. The people calling you brave. She looked down, but I know it couldn't have been easy. I didn't say anything. I stared at the swirl of foam in my cup, heart pounding. I knew she hadn't come just to check in. Not after 7 years. She breathed in slowly, like she was afraid the words might hurt. I was wrong, Miles. Your father and we were wrong. We tried to mold you and Connor into something that looked good in family portraits. We thought, if we pushed hard enough, you'd thank us one day. She paused. I thought love meant control. That hit harder than anything in my father's interview. My mother had always been the quiet enforcer, ever questioning, never wavering. Seeing her face, this truth shattered something in me I hadn't realized was still intact. When I saw Connor in the courtroom, trembling behind the defense table, I knew I had to choose justice, even if it meant losing my family. But hearing her say those words, that maybe they had been wrong, it didn't erase the years, it didn't erase the silence, but it mattered. Now, I want to ask you something, just you. Reading this right now, have you ever done the right thing and been punished for it? Let me know in the comments. Sometimes, doing what's right doesn't feel heroic. Sometimes, it just feels lonely. But maybe that loneliness is the first sign you're finally becoming free. Have you ever stood face to face with the person who broke echoingly to realize they were breaking too? I wasn't prepared for the tremble in her voice. I realize now. I helped push him to that place, she said quietly. Her hands clutched around the coffee mug like it was the only thing anchoring her. And you did the right thing, even if it hurt. I wanted to speak, I really did, but the words jammed in my throat. Finally, I managed, Mom, I didn't want to hurt anybody, but if I'd let emotions steer my judgment, I would've lost everything I believed in, lost who I am. Her eyes welled up. She reached across the table, her touch hesitant but sincere. I know, Nolan, she whispered, and I'm proud of you. I just wish we hadn't waited this long to say it out loud. That conversation lasted less than an hour, but it cracked something open in me. Not a full healing, not a tidy resolution, just ... a shift, a beginning. For the first time in years, I saw her not just as my mother, but as someone trying to understand. Someone finally reaching across the silence we both helped build. When we got up to leave, she touched my hand. I'm always here if you need me, she said. I didn't say anything, just nodded. But inside, something softened. And as she walked out of that little cafe in Boulder, a piece of that heavy, aching burden I'd been carrying finally slid off my shoulders. It's been 2 years since the trial. 2 years since I had to sit in a courtroom and make a decision that changed everything, not just for Colton, but for me. My life's still quiet. I live in a modest apartment, just outside of Denver. I still ride that old Schwinn bicycle every Sunday morning, the one with the crooked handlebar and rusted bell. But I'm not the same Nolan Brooks I used to be. I'm not that hungry, overlooked public defender fighting to prove I belonged. Now, I'm a federal judge, yeah. I still can't say it out loud without pausing for a second. Judge Nolan Brooks. But titles aside, what changed the most wasn't the robe or the courtroom. It was something deeper. Losing my family, the silence, the judgment, the isolation, it all forced me to confront what justice really means. And who I want to be when no one's watching. The day I took my oath is burned into my memory. It happened in that grand courthouse downtown Whitestone. Tall columns, a place that always made me feel small and reverent all at once. Friends were there, colleagues, even a few people I'd helped over the years. People I didn't even know remembered me. And in the third row, sitting alone in a soft blue dress, was my mum. My dad didn't come. I knew he wouldn't. He still doesn't speak to me, and maybe he never will. But her presence, quiet, unexpected, was enough. After the applause faded, she came up to me slowly, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to be proud. Her voice cracked. I'm proud of you, she said, blinking hard. You chose your own path, and I admire that, I really do. I pulled her in for a hug. And for the first time in maybe 20 years, it didn't feel awkward or forced. It felt like home. A home we never really had, but were maybe building now, one moment at a time. Thank you, I told her, for showing up. And just like that, the part of me that had clung so tightly to resentment started to let go. Not completely, not magically, but enough, to years. That's how long it took for everything to shift. And I'm sharing this because I know I'm not the only one. Some of you out there are carrying family pain so heavy it's reshaped your whole identity. Some of you are still waiting for that one sentence, "I'm proud of you," to come. So let me ask you this. What would it take for you to forgive someone who waited too long to love you the right way? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them. Maybe your story looks different than mine. Maybe you're still in the middle of it, but you're not alone. And if no one's told you lately, they should've. You're worth showing up. 4. Have you ever looked someone you love in the eyes and realized they may never forgive you? That's what it felt like each time I visited my younger brother, Noah, in prison. It's been nearly 2 years since his sentencing, and every visit still felt like walking into a storm. The room always smelled like bleach and sadness. He sat behind that thick glass, arms crossed, eyes empty. No smile, no warmth. Just that same distant stare that used to pierce through me. "How are you holding up?" I'd ask. "I'm fine," he'd mutter. Same response every time, but he wasn't. I could see it. The blame in his eyes was louder than his words. Like I was the one who'd put him there, like I'd betrayed blood for principle. Once I brought an old photo with me, one from when we were kids, chasing waves on a beach in Oregon, sunburned, barefoot, and happy. I slid it through the slot, hoping it would break down the wall between us. Maybe even just for a second. "I miss those days," I told him. Noah looked at the photo. His face didn't change. He didn't even blink. He just pushed it back toward me and said, "Those days don't mean anything anymore, Lucas. You chose justice over your own brother." God, that hurt. It sliced through me. But I didn't fight him on it. I just took a breath and replied softly, "I'll be back next month," then walked out. That picture crumpled in my hand, and my heart heavier than ever. Still, I never stopped showing up. I kept going, month after month. I brought books. I thought he'd told him about my latest cases, even if he barely responded. Sometimes we just sat there in silence. And sometimes, that silence felt like something, like he was still listening. Still human beneath the pain and the resentment, deep down. I hoped he'd eventually understand that I didn't testify because I hated him. I did it because I loved him enough to believe he needed to face what he'd done. Have you ever had to choose between justice and someone you love? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. One unexpected comfort during this time. My mum, she slowly began to reappear in my life, cautiously at first. She'd email me now and then, asking how I was doing, asking about my job, sometimes updating me about her visits to Noah. One day, out of nowhere, she invited me to dinner. At that little diner we used to go to when I was a kid, the Maple House, with the red vinyl booths and the jukebox that still plays Elvis. We ordered steaks like we used to, and for the first time in years, we really talked. Not just as mother and son, but as two people who had weathered different storms and finally found a way to meet in the calm. She looked at me across the table, her eyes filled with years of quiet regret, and said, "It took me a long time to understand you, Lucas, but I'm glad you didn't change just to please us. I'm proud of the man you've become." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm glad you're here," I said. That moment, small as it may seem, gave me a kind of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. But with my dad, it's another story. He's still locked in his own version of reality. One where the Parker name is everything, and I'm the one who shattered it. He doesn't call, he doesn't write, and honestly, I've stopped trying. Not because I've stopped caring, but because I finally realized some doors can't be forced open. Maybe one day he'll understand that. Loyalty isn't about protecting secrets, it's about protecting truth. Maybe he'll realize that family isn't about appearances or legacy, it's about love, about showing up. about doing the hard thing, even when it hurts. But until that day comes, if it ever does, I've made peace with the silence. Now, as I sit in my office at the U.S. District Courthouse in downtown Seattle, staring out at the wet skyline and the distant Cascade Mountains, I can finally take a breath and reflect. I was the soft son, the one who read books instead of hunting trips, the one who went to law school instead of business school, the one they thought would never amount to much, and yet, here I am. Not because I needed to prove them wrong, but because I needed to prove something to myself, that I could live a life of purpose. That I could make decisions I believed in, even if they cost me the people I loved. The title on my door says Judge Lucas Parker. But that's not my legacy. My legacy is in the rulings I've made for the voiceless. The courage it took to stand for what's right, even when it was personal. The lives I've touched, and the scars I carry. There are still nights I lie awake, wondering, could I have done something different? Could I have saved Noah another way? But then, I remember the promise I made to myself the day I first walked into court as a public defender. Truth over comfort. Justice over silence. Always on, if you've ever had to make a hard choice, the kind that cost you love or family. I hope this story gives you a little strength, because sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't feel like victory. It feels like grief. But it's still the right thing. If you've read this far, I'd love to hear. Have you ever been blamed for doing what you believed was right? Drop your story in the comments, I'm listening. Have you ever stood your ground for what you knew was right, and watched everything around you fall apart because of it? I have, and I'd do it all over again. When I made my decision about Colton's Casino, my brother's KCA, knew it would tear my family apart. But I also knew deep in my gut that justice doesn't bend for blood. It doesn't shy away just because the truth is inconvenient or because someone you love is the one standing trial. There were nights I'd lie awake wondering if I could have saved him by doing something differently. Could I have gotten through to him sooner? Could I have convinced my father that protecting a name is not the same as protecting what's right? But here's the truth I've come to understand. You can't change people. You can't force someone to see the world through your eyes. You can only live by your own values and hope the people who matter will eventually understand why. I don't regret what I did. Not for a second. Yes, it cost me something irreplaceable, my father's trust, Colton's love, a version of my family that no longer exists, but it gave me something far more valuable. Peace of mind. Because justice, even when it's harsh, is the only way to confront wrongdoing and make space for redemption. Some of you might ask, why not forgive? Why not reconcile? But reconciliation isn't something you can summon out of thin air. My father still lives in a world ruled by image and legacy. And Colton... Well, he's still angry, still wounded. But I see the change flickering in him. During these last months of his sentence, there's something in his eyes, regret, maybe, or understanding starting to form. I visit him often, not to heal our past, but to quietly plant the seeds for a different future. And my mother. After all the silence and distance, she's slowly come back into my life. Not like it was before, those days are long gone, but enough that I don't feel entirely alone. There's warmth now, a quiet presence that says, you're still my child. Even if we both got lost for a while. If I could offer one piece of advice to anyone who's ever felt torn between loyalty and truth, it would be this. Live according to what you know is right, even if it makes you the outcast, even if it costs you the approval of those you love. Because at the end of the day, it's not their approval that defines your worth, it's how you get up after being knocked down. It's how you refuse to betray your values, even when it would be easier to stay silent. There will be days you feel misunderstood, rejected, like you're walking this road alone. But if you're living in integrity, if you're choosing honesty over comfort, justice over convenience, and truth over silence, then you're not really alone. You're building something that lasts. As I sit here now, the late afternoon sun lighting up the peaks outside my window, I feel that quiet certainty. Don't have a perfect family. I don't have the wealth or the legacy my father wanted me to inherit. But I have something else. A name I didn't compromise. A life I didn't betray. A belief, unshaken, that even when the world turns cold, integrity will always light the way. So I ask you, what do you believe is worth standing for? Drop a comment. Tell me about the moment you chose to be true to yourself, especially when it cost you something. Or maybe you're facing that moment right now. I'll be here, listening. Because sometimes, it's in each other's stories that we find the strength to keep going.